speedcrafting terrain because, you know, who's got the time to slow craft? Let's build some wasp nests. Greetings, good humans, and welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where sometimes we speedcraft terrain for an upcoming gaming session. Sometimes we do that quite a bit, actually. And we also thank our patrons for their steadfast support. You guys are much appreciated. Alright, so in the last video, we painted up some burning wasps. And for the Rangers of Shadow Deep scenario, those were painted up for. We also need some, well, in the game book, they're called giant flies, and there are some tactical scatter terrain pieces needed on the board called fly holes. And those are points on the board that are going to spew forth the giant flies. But, you know, since I painted up the wasps as wasps, we're going to call them wasp nests. I mean, technically, I suppose these terrain bits we're making today are just like the top openings to what are implied to be massive underground nests, I suppose. So, I kind of know what the basic shape of these wasp nest whole things should be, you know, vaguely conical in shape, and there is one feature the terrain pieces need, which is the ability to have a miniature stand on them. Now, not just like on the sides or whatever, but actually a miniature needs to be able to stand on top of the wasp hole, because it's like, you know, new wasps appear, or when they appear on the board, they need to start on the top of the wasp nest, and there's a mechanic in the scenario that the rangers can stop new wasps from spawning by standing on top of a wasp nest. I guess they're standing there and stabbing the wasps as they climb up, or chopping their heads off, or whatever. But with that in mind, I just need some scatter bases to start with, you know, and I originally thought I'd just cut out some bases from my stockpile of Sintra, but then I was driving to the grocery store the other day, and I was passing Hobby Lobby, and I was like, hey, I bet Hobby Lobby's got some cheapy wooden discs I could get, and not have to bother cutting out my own, because I will do almost anything to get out of manual labor. Now, I was right, they had a couple of these little baggies full of basically 3-inch diameter discs that will make great, simple little bases. So I picked up 2 bags because each bag only had 4 discs, and I think I want to make a set of 5 of these wasp nest hole things. I think the scenario only calls for 3 at the start of the game, but I think a new one could open up during the game. But even if not, there are some, you know, other scenarios and other games we might need or want more than 3 wasp nest, so I decided to go with 5. Now, for the cone shape, I immediately figured I'd just use some of the little condiment containers I use for everything else, including that bonfire scatter terrain thing we made a while back. And it worked. That was a weak snap. Is that better? That one. And it worked. It worked great for that, the condiment cup. And the 2 main perks of using these containers is, of course, the conical shape, which we want, and the fact that the bottom of the cup can be used as, the bottom of the cup will be at the top of the terrain piece, and it'll give the miniatures something to stand on. But then, when I auditioned the condiment cups on the wooden bases, I thought maybe they were a little too tall, and on a whim, I decided to cut one of the cups in half, just to see what it would look like on the base. And I think the bottom, or wider end of the cup, now it's a sloped ring that I think is wide enough to accommodate the average miniature base, and because it's open at the top, it provides a wall that I can fold over the modeling compound I'm going to use to create a nice visual look to the overall wasp nest thing, right? So, just kind of perfect. So, I cut up 5 condiment cups and hot glued them down to the wood discs. Super easy. Now, for the modeling compound or material I decided to go with, I'm going to use Apoxie Sculpt. It's a 2-part epoxy that hardens up into a surface that you can sand and sculpt after it's dry, but it's nice to work with when it's soft, and you can do quite a bit with it, and you can use water to smooth it while you're working with it, and to keep it from sticking to your fingers or whatever. It's just an all-around great epoxy putty, and it's very similar, I guess, to green stuff, but one thing I like about it is it doesn't shrink at all, and I like it a lot better than green stuff, personally. Now, another reason I wanted to use a sort of clay-like substance, you know, something like Sculpey or green stuff or Apoxie Sculpt, is because I had an idea for a texturing method that I thought was quite genius, and you know, this is the best kind of medium to use with this genius method that I think is genius. Spoiler, it's not genius. I'm well aware of my self-grandiosity. Thank you very much. Donuts are in the back. Anyway, yes, there are all kinds of ways you could build up or make these nests based on this cut up condiment cup armature. You could goop on all kinds of stuff and get a pretty cool, fast and simple wasp nesty looking thing. But I'm using this Apoxie Sculpt, and I got to put my gloves on because I get finicky about sticky stuff on my fingers. I don't know, I'm weird, but I got gloves, and I'm going to use them. And of course, I'm going to use some of my prized high-quality stainless steel torture instruments. I mean, sculpting tools, you know, things that I almost never use for sculpting because I don't know how to sculpt. Okay, so it looks like my epoxy is as old as it is. This jar is probably around 8 years old now, and as you can see, it's leaching out chemicals. And I don't know if this stuff is actually going to work. I'll just dig down into what looks like the still intact portions of the putty, and we'll see how it goes. This stuff is just like green stuff. It's a very simple 50-50 mix, and you just squish it together and mix it up. And then you have about a 20 to 30 minute working time where it stays pretty malleable, and then it'll start to harden up. And I think obviously you probably want things to always cure like 24 hours, but this stuff, I mean, it cures pretty quick in a few hours. So I'll squish out a rectangular pancake and wrap it around the cone-shaped walls and fold it over the lip. It's working just like I thought it would. And we just smush it down around the bottom to blend it into the base, and yeah, it's super simple. It's definitely forming the shape I thought it would, and I can just mix up another little batch to wrap the other half in, and I can blend it right into itself. Now I want to try my genius idea with this first piece before it sets up too much, just to see how it's going to go. So I was thinking about, you know, bug nests and beehives, and I kept thinking about honeycomb and that hex pattern it has, and I was like, it would be cool if there was some kind of weird buggy or insect-like pattern or texture on the walls of these nests, and I was wondering what I could use to imprint a pattern onto the modeling compound. I mean, I don't have one of the rollers. I have a couple of those roller things that have patterns in them, but I don't have one that's got a hex pattern in it. The idea that popped in my head was Torx screwdrivers. I was just thinking of what I had laying around that could be used to make a hex shape in clay, and I had this little set of Torx bits, and I was like, hey, these might work. They're metal, they won't stick to the epoxy, and they have sharp edges, and they have some interesting profiles that could make some cool patterns or textures. And then I noticed that a couple of these bits have holes or dimples in the centers of the star profiles, and I was like, oh, I wonder if that would be cool. I think it is pretty cool. It's doing a pretty good job. That hole in the middle of the bit forms a bubbly looking texture, and there's still, you know, the sort of star hex patterny thing going on the edges. It's actually cooler than I thought it would be. It looks, to me, very alien insect, sort of. But, you know, don't worry. I'm going to make it much less cool with the paint job later. So, you know, just hold your applause. But I'll definitely be keeping these Torx bits in mind for future projects. You never know when you might need some stars or hexes or whatever. So I just chilled out and did the other 4 bases like this, and there they are, all 5. To be honest, seeing them now, I mean, like in the footage on the computer, I think they look better here than the finished versions. I think what I mean is I see a lot of potential in them as far as where finishing could go. There's like so many ways you could paint these up or base them with other materials. There's like a lot you could do with these. But I didn't do any of that stuff because I'm just trying to speedcraft these and get it over with. Anyway, to blend the epoxy edges into the bases more, I'm going to slap down some terrain paste. Now, this could be done with a simple mix of white glue and sand or grout or flock or whatever, just some filler and white glue, but I have a couple jars of this overpriced AK stuff, and I should just use it up because, again, this stuff, it's stuff I've had for a few years and it's basically drying out. So it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but this stuff in its current state is definitely much drier and thicker to work with than it was when it was fresh. So I pushed through this first base and fought with the paste, but then I thought, man, let's see if we can just, you know, thin this stuff back out to where it used to be, you know, density-wise. So I grabbed an old applesauce cup, and I put some in there, and I added a little bit of water, and then I thought, well, maybe I should add some glue too, just to make sure the water doesn't thin the hardening property of the paste too much. That's not like a scientifically based thought in any way. It was just an Ignatius thought. And so I grabbed one of the many bottles of glue I have laying around, and I went with this turbo tacky because I thought I'd try to put something in there that would set up as quickly as the AK paste sets up. Again, not that I have any scientific basis for any of the decisions that I make. All right, I just like the word turbo. Fine. Just leave me alone. So I mixed up that turbo glue. What What a great marketing team that company has. This glue is way faster than all the crappy non-turbo white glue you have. I don't think it's really that much faster than any regular white glue. It is a little stronger than regular white glue, but whatever. It says turbo on it, so it's cool and we're going with it. Anyway, it seemed like I'd put too much of these additional liquids in, the glue and the water, so I just kept adding paste until I got it to where it seemed similar to the original viscosity of the original stuff when I opened the containers years ago. And then I just slapped it down on the rest of the bases and it seemed to work fine. Now I added a little bit of the paste to the insides of the mounds, and I debated putting it down on the bases inside of the holes, but that seemed like a messy and time-consuming proposition, and I also just didn't want to interfere too much with the ability to stand miniatures inside the cones, so I just put some on the inner walls, and there we go. 5 pasted up bases. I let those bases sit overnight to cure, and they seemed to harden up without any issues and seem to work just like normal. So that's great. It's awesome that I can thin that AK stuff back out and actually get more use out of it. Now, just to prime them up, I just used my typical black primer and decided to slop it on with a big brush instead of going with the airbrush, because that would have required me to get up from my chair and trek across the apartment to the other table and set up my airbrush booth and turn on my compressor and thin out some primer and put it in the airbrush and spray all of these and then dump out the paint and then clean out the airbrush and then put everything away and then bring the bases all the way back here to the painting table, and that all just sounded like too much work. Now, for painting these, I have the Wasp color scheme in mind from the Wasp video that I already snapped, and they are painted up like these burning wasps. So I thought, well, burning wasps must come from burning nests, right? So I'll just paint the nest in the same way. So I got some white ink out and added a little bit of express medium, and I put that down over the top halves of each nest hole thing in preparation for the yellow that's going to come next. Now I tried to feather the white off into the black just to not have like a hard edge of color to deal with, and I just did that with extra water. And there we go. The same yellow I used on the wasps. It's an express color. I just thinned it a little bit with the express medium to keep it smooth and doused all the white areas with it. And then I feathered that out a little bit into the black as well. Again, just to keep, that hard edge of color from happening. And now for the first dry brush layer. I used the same medium rust color I used on the wasps, and I used, I think, one of the largest dry brushes I have, which I got from Amazon. It's basically a knockoff of the Artist Opus brush sets because those are expensive. So I tried to go fairly light on the dry brush, but in the end, I just kind of ended up dry brushing away like normal. And I took that color all the way out to towards the edges of the base. And again, just trying to get this, sort of gradation happening out to the edges, something like that anyway. And then I went straight to black for the charred look. And again, just a straightforward dry brush pass. Now I'm trying to keep the heat look from the brighter recesses and the darker raised areas, but this is speedcrafting and speed painting. We're not going for amazing execution. What's that triangle thing? There's cheap, there's fast, and good. Choose 2. Whoever came up with that is brilliant. Anyway, I didn't take the black out as far as the brown, and yeah, it's just a super simple, quick paint job. Now for some tufts. I know that I'm going to be putting down a reddish brown rocky themed game mat for the scenario we're going to play. So with the idea of the hot nests, I put down some drier, deader looking tufts of grass tufts, just 2 on each base, because I still want miniatures to be able to stand on the outer edges, right? And then a whole bunch of watered down white glue and this dark brown sand mix that I had. Again, super simple and quick, easy stuff. Maybe I should have used a turbo glue, but I didn't. I just used regular white glue. I added some dark reddish black flock to the sand too, just a little bit, and I just scooped it on there. Just nothing fancy, nothing fancy going on. And there we go. We can call them done at this point. I mean, I could go a little farther with some dry brushing over the sand flock, but all in all, these will work on the table. At least they fit the wasp flying stands, right? And we can kind of put a miniature on top when we need to. It's a super simple speedcraft, really, and they'll work on the table. So, mission accomplished. It's a bare minimum, but sometimes you just don't have time to do anything other than the bare minimum. But cool enough is okay sometimes. So, see what weird things you might have laying around the workshop or on the hobby desk that might make good textures or weird patterns. The more surprising, the better. See ya.